Um, yeah, and this short webinar grew out of a conversation that Greg and I were having a couple of weeks ago, or maybe it was a little bit longer than that. And both Greg and I, amongst I guess some other people in this call, are members of AA and been sober for varying lengths of time. And we were just having a conversation about, well, it's mainly about your journey, Greg, but about our journeys. And I thought it would be really nice to, to record something of that and have it available as a resource for people who have issues with addictions or are interested in that field. And I think you have a really powerful story, Greg. So it would be lovely to, to hear more about that, as time permits. And perhaps just to kick off, if I hand it over to you.
Sure. Thank you very much for asking. Well, I guess I'll start. Now, everything I'll talk about is really kind of my understanding that I have now. It's not necessarily the understanding I had while I was going through the things. So I'll kind of preface it with that. Because looking back, the hindsight is 2020 thing. I do have a much better view of what was happening at the time, but and I'll try to make it a speedy one. But I have a very early memory. I must have been about 4 years old, and I distinctly remember my family. We had family game nights, and I actually had, looking back, I had a great childhood, but. I remember sitting on the swing in a backyard at the house where I grew up at, listening to my family inside the house playing games and having fun, and I was outside alone, feeling like I didn't belong, feeling sorry for myself, like like I was born without the manual to life, and that feeling was always there. In varying degrees, some days it wouldn't be quite so overwhelming, and some days it would be, pretty severe. And this is where I've come to understand my addiction to come from is that the part of our brain, the amygdala, is responsible for like survival and fight or flight and stuff like that. And since we don't really have to worry about large predators and things like that anymore in the modern world so much, it's kind of bored, so it looks for things like that feeling that I had, and it starts paying attention to that, and my survival technique became how to not feel that way I didn't like to feel. And the first thing that started for me was I'd come home from school or something, have a hard day, and my mom would say, here, have some milk and cookies or something to feel better. And I did feel better for a while. The rush from the carbs and the sugar, all that stuff would kind of make me feel better for a little bit. And that part of my brain kind of started making a checklist. And it said, oh, when I feel that way that I don't like to feel, if I have sweets, then I won't feel so bad. And that kind of worked off and on for a few years, but by the time I was 12, at that point, I things like I was raised Catholic, and I went to Sunday school and all the, jumped through all the hoops for that. But by the time I was 12, I was questioning the nuns in Sunday school, and I started getting in trouble in Sunday school and getting kicked out and had to talk to the priest. And I really have no clue what he said, but what I heard was that I'm going to hell. And, I'm 12 years old and I already feel like I don't fit in anywhere. And now suddenly I don't fit in even at, this church that I have to go to every week. And it was shortly after that New Year's Eve that I decided to, my parents were hosting a New Year's Eve party, and I noticed that everybody there seemed to be happy. And I was looking for the common denominator, and what I saw was that they all had a drink in their hand. So I stole a few beers and I hid down in our basement laundry room alone and got drunk for my first time. I remember the first one made me feel a little bit fuzzy, and I kind of liked it. I like the taste of it. I like the feel of it. I like the smell of it. And then I put the second one in me and I felt even better. And by the third one, I'd found that relief. and it was way more effective than the food. But, at 12, I wasn't able to get alcohol all the time. So I still mainly stuck with the food, and every chance I got, I drank. And that really continued up until I was 21. And at that point, I hadn't really started to add any drugs or anything into it yet, because my parents did raise me that, drugs are bad. And I actually believed them on that stuff. So I really just stuck to the drinking and overeating and eating a bunch of junk food. But when I turned 21, I was finally able to be a daily drinker and escape on a daily basis. And it was shortly after that I met my wife, and she liked to drink like I did. So we spent the next quite a few years escaping together. And at some point, and I believe all along that list that the amygdala is making, it just starts adding these things like, let's add beer and then liquor, and then later on started adding different drugs to the list. And this, it all kind of happens subconsciously. So I believe that the more I entertain a certain item on that list, it's almost like putting another check mark after it. And it becomes the priority. And it becomes that go-to. And that's what I believe makes the difference between somebody who, we might call an alcoholic or a drug addict or, an overeater or whatever. It's just which one of those things we entertain the most often. They got the most check marks after it. And what I'm starting to see with the principles is that every time I choose not to entertain those thoughts, and it is a choice, as difficult as it is to see at first, that is really a choice. It seems like every time I choose not to entertain those and to go with my wisdom and understanding of the principles, it's almost like that got added to the checklist. But every time I choose that, I get like 2 check marks. It seems to be that much more effective that, it starts overtaking the other ones more quickly. And I found that this was about 2 months ago. I woke up one morning getting ready for work, and I'd realized that I hadn't had any caffeine in 3 weeks. I mean, this was something that I tried at least backing off on quite a few times. I always got that nasty headache and the withdrawal symptoms. And here I was, I hadn't had any in 3 weeks and had no withdrawal symptoms. And that's similar to what happened back in June of 2012. I came home to find my wife covered in blood and vomit, and I thought she was dead. She had slit her wrist. She took a couple hundred pills, drank a bunch of booze, and I couldn't find a pulse or anything. So I rushed her to the emergency room, and they stabilized her and sent her to an emergency psychiatric unit where she was held for 72 hours for observation. At the end of that observation is when we were both, we were both finally ready to change things. That experience helped me and my wife Sheena is on this webinar also. We finally realized that the way that we were living, we couldn't continue living that way. It just wasn't working. And that's when they introduced us to Alcoholics Anonymous. And now, mind you, people had mentioned it to me times before, but it was always, for me, it was always kind of that sounds interesting. If I ever run into somebody who has that problem, I'll be sure to let them know. I really wasn't able to see it for myself that I might have had a problem with the way that I was using, different substances just to escape reality. But so I started actually going to AA just to support my wife. And of course I went in with the puffed up chest and I'm here to support my wife. Look at me. And the very first meeting we go to, there was a guy there that saw right through me, and he came up and he's talking to me. I'm like, oh, no, I'm just here to support her. And he said the 3 most obnoxious words that I could have heard that day, which was keep coming back. and I knew what he meant by it, but I still didn't know why he said it to me, type of thing. But I kept coming back. In some way, I thought maybe he meant I'm a good supporter, so keep coming back in that way. But at a deeper level, I kind of knew there was something else behind it. So I just kept coming back and saying, I'm here to support her, here to support her. And, we went to a couple too many meetings. I heard a few too many things that I could relate to. And I started reading the big book a little bit, just getting curious so I could help her. And it hit me at one point. I read that there were times I could stop drinking and using for a couple months if I really needed to get a new job or something. I could clean up, and that's why I felt I had control over it. And then I got to the story in the big book about the man that quit drinking for 30 years and then retired and went back to drinking and then died a couple years later. And it got me thinking that maybe, just maybe, I might have some kind of problem going on here. And so that night I went to a meeting to support her, of course. And I'm standing out front of this sober club and chain smoking cigarettes, and I get a tap on my shoulder, and the guy says, "Oh, Greg, you crazy son of a bitch, it's about time you got here." And I spin around, I see this guy. He used to own a gas station in the town I grew up in, and I would buy beer off the people that worked at his station when I was underage. And it closed down like 13 years before, and I had no clue what happened to him. And it turned out that he'd found his bottom and he'd gotten sober, and we ended up talking that night. And even like I'd started to consider the possibility that maybe I could be an alcoholic, but somewhere inside it still didn't feel right. It still, every time I said that, it almost felt like I was harming myself, even though I knew that I had a problem with drinking and using drugs and eating. And, at that point, even, I went from half a pack of cigarettes a day up to over 2 packs a day. I was drinking at least a gallon of coffee a day. I mean, I just kept trading addictions over and over again. And so I start going to meetings. I introduce myself as an alcoholic, and every time it just feels wrong. And I started asking around about different, people's different spiritual beliefs, because I felt like that was more of where it was at. My sponsor at the time had a 1-year plan of me working the steps, so there was no rush for for getting through those. But so I started reading different books. Somebody suggested I read the Sermon on the Mount by Emmett Fox, and that was my first introduction to the idea of thoughts holding power and thoughts manifesting things and creating, reality. And it really intrigued me. And I started making comments about it at meetings, ended up in this study group at a guy's house he's from Israel, and he's well-versed in different religions. And a few of the people on this call have met him, and he's an absolutely amazing guy. And I spent the next couple of years at his place reading different spiritual texts and talking about things and just really growing in that way. But something strange happened at 3 months of sobriety. I was also reading a book called Drop the Rock, which is about getting rid of your character defects. And there was a lot of stuff in there that sounded nice, but there was something that really stuck with me for some reason. And it said that God cannot remove those defects of character that we're still practicing. And at the same time, my wife and I were going to a church once a week for a free meal and groceries and stuff, because we were pretty financially destroyed. And I never really listened to the preacher when he'd talk, but for some reason that week I was listening, and he was talking about sometimes God has to let us get sick to get our attention. And I didn't think much of it that day, but it kind of got things swirling around in my head. I had more thoughts swirling. I woke up the next morning so sick that I couldn't get out of bed. And I ended up being in bed for 3 days. And on the 4th day, I get up and I realized I hadn't had a cigarette in 3 days, and I didn't want one anymore. So when people ask me, when I quit smoking, I said I didn't quit, I just stopped. It wasn't a conscious decision. But the really awesome thing happened 2 months later. It was at exactly 5 months of sobriety, it was Thanksgiving Day. We went to a big, they call it a gratitude meeting. And the idea is that everybody gets 30 seconds to say what they're grateful for, and then you move on to the next person. So there's no negativity, no complaining. It was really a beautiful thing. And there was about 250 people there. So it took well over an hour to get through everybody. But there was this feeling in the air, this energy that I could just sense out of it. And as soon as everybody joined hands to say a prayer at the end, I wasn't there in the physical world anymore. And all I saw was energy and light. And every person in that room became, there was no shape to it, but became this like energy field. And I could see how everything was connected. And I felt this overwhelming feeling that everything's okay. It was like unconditional love just filled me. And I kind of came back to the room, and I really had no clue what had happened. And by then they were done with the prayer, and had moved on to other things. And I'm just kind of standing there dumbfounded by what I just experienced. And that day I didn't say anything to anybody except my wife, because I really had no clue how to put it into words at all. And but I was really curious what happened. So I started asking people in the program. I said, what is this? Have you experienced anything like this? What do you think it might be? And the thing that surprised me was that the overwhelming answer that I got from people was that what I had felt was dangerous, and that I was going to get drunk and die because of it, because I didn't have enough time in the program and I hadn't worked my steps. So I decided to get a new sponsor, because I found another guy who did a 4-week workshop where you could go through all the steps in 4 weeks. So I said, perfect. So now I can go through the steps. So at least they don't have anything to say about that. And while I'm going through the steps, it was strange, because everything that my sponsor was telling me, I already understood at a deeper level. It didn't need to be explained. And like my part in, I don't know how much everybody knows about the steps, but in the 4th step, you do an inventory of your resentments, and there's 4 columns, and the 4th column is what your part is. And it didn't take much for me to be able to see my part in it now. It was strange. Whatever happened to me that day on Thanksgiving Day, I just tapped into that wisdom. And I spent the next 2.5 years trying to find the answer to what actually happened to me that day. And it wasn't until about 2.5 years later, I saw an announcement in our church bulletin that just said, new meeting, 3 principles. And that's all it said. But something pulled me to it. And I wasn't able to go when they first started, but it was about 2 months in, because I was going to college. And about 2 months later, I was finally able to attend the meeting, and I run into Bob Shell, and he's on the call here somewhere. I can't see him on the camera, but there he is. He's explained to me these 3 simple principles that explain how everything in life works and how we experience everything and how much better it's made his life. And I thought he was absolutely crazy, because it can't be that simple. There's no 12 steps to this freedom. There's no 30 main points to whatever. But while my intellect was saying no, that deeper wisdom in me was saying, yes, this is it. You found it. And ever since then, I've just been delving into this and putting everything, not intellectually, but just I've spent that was about 1.5 years ago. And I spent the last 1.5 years trying to debunk the principles. Quite honestly, trying to find how they don't work. And I haven't found one single situation where they don't apply. I haven't been able to find anything that doesn't fall in line with how these principles work. And, it hit me a little while back. It's like, man, this is true recovery, because I don't have to fight getting drunk today or getting high today. And the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous talks about being cured. If you look in the family afterward, it talks about being cured. But I don't know that being cured means that I can safely drink again. But to me, the fact that I have no desire to is just as much of a cure. The fact that I can go to places where alcohol is being served. I go to a big music jam once a month where there's, drugs and whatever around too, and it's not even an issue. But to me, that is every bit as much of a cure as being able to safely use, because I've reached this point where I feel so good inside that I truly believe that if I used any of that stuff again, it could only make me feel worse. There's no way it could possibly make me feel better. Whereas before, I was feeling so badly about myself and life and not fitting in that it at least seemed to give me some relief for a little while. So I decided, well, my first 3 principles book that I read was actually The Serenity Principle by Joseph Bailey. And he put into words exactly what I'd been thinking about AA for a few years now. Like, man, it's not that AA is a bad thing. I'm not against AA. It's just that, even Bill Wilson himself said that those 12 steps were only his best guess at a way to help other people have the experience that he had. And I've gone through, I live in Akron, Ohio, so we have really good archives here with a lot of letters and different documents that aren't generally, they're not really distributed. So I've read a lot of what Bill Wilson wrote to other people. And he was really big on encouraging different things, trying what he called healthy experimentation. He was big on AA evolving and growing and expanding and becoming more effective. And in the book, Alcoholics Anonymous Comes of Age, he wrote about the 4th tradition in there, which is that any 2 or 3 gathered together for sobriety can call themselves an AA group. And he said, he emphasized that is even if they don't agree with any of AA's philosophy. They can be absolutely 100% against what AA stands for and still call themselves an AA group as long as they're together for the purpose of sobriety. And he said that it's important to have those different groups that are trying different things, because one of 2 things will happen. One, either they'll fail and they'll be forced to adopt AA's principles anyway for survival, or they'll succeed and they'll find something more effective, and AA should adopt their principles. And when I read that, I was like, man, at the time I was already running a little study group based on the Serenity Principle. It was not an AA group. And it was right about that time that I started having people not come back. And I got a hold of some of them, and they said, well, my sponsor said I can't go because it's not an AA group. So I started looking deeper into the traditions and found that I had everything there that actually qualified it as an official AA group. So back in January, I registered it with the local intergroup, and much more recently, I actually registered with New York for the General Services Office. So it's actually an official 3 principles-based AA group. And there's been a few people that have come through, and I could see a dramatic difference from when they came in. There's one guy in particular, I only saw him once, and that's kind of the weird part about it, but I kind of understand at the same time. But he came in, he was just crying, and he was beaten down, and he was done. And by the end of that meeting, he was just smiling ear to ear. His eyes were different. His demeanor was different. Everything was totally different. And it's amazing to see that, week after week, I get at least 1 or 2 new people that come through, and I get to expose them to this idea. And not everybody's ready for it. Some people are still very closed-minded to different things, but there are some people who are open to it. And it's a beautiful thing to see that, just to see true hope. letting go of that fear of this disease idea, and the idea I'm always going to be sick, and this disease is out there, getting stronger, so it's just waiting for me to come back out so it can kill me. It's like, that's not true. I'm already well. All of us are. Everybody that walks into AA is well. And part of the reason that people end up in AA is because we have this deeper feeling that we can feel better, that there is something better than what we've been doing. Otherwise, what would be the point? And even the word, recovery, if you look at that in and of itself means that there has to be something there in the first place in order to recover it. I can't recover my car from the river if my car never went into the river. I can't recover health and well-being and peace of mind and serenity if it isn't already there. So it's not a matter of getting somewhere. It's not a matter of becoming a whole person. It's a matter of, as Joe Bailey puts it in the Serenity Principle, serenity is our natural state of being when we stop doing the things that take us away from it. And that's the message that I'm trying to bring into AA and into recovery, especially. Even if it doesn't end up being an AA meeting in the future, this is the message I will continue to spread. I'm actually currently in school. I'm looking to change over to actually, I want to get into holistic nursing so I can open my own practice and really get this message out there. Because I believe this is the vital message that needs to be spread. But does anybody have any questions or anything?
We do have a question from Ivan, actually. So, Ivan, I'm going to unmute you if I can. Yeah. There you go. Ivan, you're on.
Can anybody else hear him? I can't hear him.
Ivan, we can't hear you. No one can hear you. Do you want to type your question? Because we're still not hearing you. Ivan, you still seem to be muted, or you're showing as unmuted. I don't know if Ivan just. If you still want to ask the question, Ivan, why don't you type it, and I'll see if would anybody else like to ask a question in the meantime, because we have actually gone over our 30 minutes, but we have a few minutes left.
I didn't realize how long it was.
That's great.
So I get a little passionate about this.
Excellent. And does anybody else want to come in, or I'm going to call on people? Alan, do you have a question?
No, just no.
Sorry to put you in the hot seat. I know that you have also introduced other ideas and found other aspects things helpful to or maybe I'm oversharing there.
No, not at all. No questions.
Okay. Well, I'll just mute you again. And does anybody else have anything that Ronald? Have you unmuted yourself? Do you have something you'd like to ask?
Me?
Yeah.
I had a question for him.
Sure.
What do you say to your clients that have to stay in AA, but they have a pretty good understanding now of the three principles. Like legally, I have clients that are court committed to stay in AA. They understand the three principles. They feel like it's wasting their time now. Them, Greg.
Well, that's actually part of the reason I started the meeting, to make it an official AA meeting, because I can sign court documents. So they can fulfill their commitment. Usually it's a meeting a week. If they do have to go to more, there's a couple of meetings around here that I tend to point people to, only because they're a little bit more open-minded, but they're definitely not three principles open-minded. I've tried, but they're at least not they're not the singleness of purpose, alcohol only, type of meetings. So at least they're not quite as annoying to go to for most people. But that was really one of the purposes of making my meeting an actual AA group, was just so I can fulfill that commitment for people and sign their papers. And I do actually have a couple of people that come with court papers. So
tell them to grin and
outside of that, I always like to point back to the fact that every single one of us is spiritually and psychologically innocent, because we're all only doing the best that we can with the current thinking level that we're at. So the people in AA that are kind of stuck in that mindset, they're innocently. And the ones that show up at my meeting and try to attack and say it's not an AA meeting and try to get me shut down, they're doing it innocently. They're doing the best that they know how to do at the current moment. And when the day comes that their level of understanding changes, the way that they respond will change as well. So that helps me a lot too. I still go occasionally to regular AA meetings, mostly just to try to attract people and, spread the message a little bit more. But even I get annoyed sometimes. I almost overdose on AA meetings sometimes. So it's okay. It's a learning process. And this is, it's well worth it. This is going to help so many people and give hope to so many people. And especially with this heroin epidemic that's going around. I mean, people are they're sending people to treatment after they overdose, and they're going to treatment and they're being told that this drug has completely changed their brain chemistry and that they're always going to be fighting it for the rest of their lives. And they wonder why these people go out and overdose again and die. What kind of hope is that? To go to a treatment center and be told that you're always going to have to fight this, that you're never going to be okay. I would just love to hug those people. Like, you're already okay. I love Bill Pettit's thing about never broken, nothing lacking. There is no disease. There's just a habitual thought process. That's it. Habitual thought patterns that cause us to do things that we believe are helping us at the time. It's all innocent, every single bit of it.
We're rapidly running out of time, folks. Is there anything you would like to just say to finish us off tonight? Tonight here in the UK, Greg, I know it's middle of the day for you there.
Right. Well, addictions and habits cannot be beat by fighting what it is that people are addicted to. You can't fight heroin. You can't fight marijuana. You can't fight any of this stuff. Once it no longer makes sense to do a certain thing, people will just stop doing it. So if I can learn how to feel better without putting a chemical in myself, I will no longer need to use that chemical. And I'm experiencing the same thing with food. That's kind of the last thing hanging on for me. But I get, lately my like my urges to eat crap have been happening less often. And even when I give in to them, it's not as bad as it was. So I even see a great improvement in that side just by not fighting it, realizing that food isn't the issue. It's my thinking behind it. You know, that's why when I got sober, I switched from, you know, booze and drugs to cigarettes and caffeine and whatever else. I mean, it's the thinking process. So we need to quit fighting heroin. We need to start giving hope for, you know, that innate well-being that's within every single one of us. And I do mean everybody. So I love you all.
Well, thanks, Greg. Thanks so much for doing this today, and thanks everybody for joining us. I'm just